didn't realise that it hadn't finished that. Members, sitting is resumed and it's time for questions to the Minister of Finance, and I'll start with the listed questions and call Connie Egan.
Number 1, please.
I intend bringing forward marriage law reforms which will create more choice and flexibility for couples seeking to marry, will provide equality for those with religious and non-religious beliefs, and will bring this jurisdiction into line with international best practice on marriage age. I believe that is all to be welcomed, and I look forward to debating these important reforms in the Assembly in due course. Regulation of marriages undertaken by independent celebrants would require significant further reform to the existing marriage legislation. I do not consider that reform in relation to this issue is the priority and should not hold up the important reforms that are currently planned to proceed in the legislation, including in particular the intention to increase minimum marriage age, which I am keen to see implemented without additional delay.
Second.
Thank you, Minister. Lots of very welcome commitments there. Can I ask, though, if you are committing to bring this during the mandate, why it wasn't included in the executive legislative programme?
So, as the member might be aware, the executive legislative programme that has been published is for this calendar year only, so it's up until December 2024, and this legislation is quite far advanced in terms of its policy preparation, and is something I intend to bring to the executive quite soon.
Minister, what changes are you planning to bring forward in respect of marriage law?
Minister.
I propose to bring forward reforms that will firstly place belief marriages on a formal equal footing to religious marriage, replacing the temporary arrangements that are currently in place. In addition, I propose to increase the minimum age of marriage and civil partnership from the current 16 to 18. This will bring this jurisdiction into line with established best practice. Provisions will be included around recognition of marriages elsewhere where one party is under 18 and lives in this jurisdiction, and will also provide for criminal offences for adults who arrange or attempt to arrange the marriage of a person under 18. I believe these are important reforms that will help safeguard our children and young people. I have recently circulated an executive paper to my ministerial colleagues asking them for their views, and I am confident that the plan I have set out will receive the necessary support for us to proceed with this work, and subject to competing legislative priorities, I would hope to see a bill introduced in the Assembly in the early part of next year.
Stephen Dunn.
Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
I was pleased to secure Assembly support for the restoration of the Back in Business scheme on the 14th of May. The scheme then opened for applications on the 15th of May. Once a business has supplied all required evidence, the application will be processed within 10 working days. The scheme should have a significant impact on securing the occupation of long-term empty retail space in our towns and cities. Importantly, on the evidence of its last iteration, the scheme predominantly goes to smaller retail units and is paid to smaller operators and independent traders, providing them with much needed support in their first 2 years of trading. The design of this scheme grows the tax base and comes at a notional cost on the basis that these properties might never have become occupied otherwise.
Mr. Dunn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the Minister for her answer and this welcome initiative to support our businesses. Can the Minister outline what more can be done to support existing retailers and small businesses in our town and city centres who are trying to compete with online shopping and facing obviously the challenges of ever rising costs of rent, rates, wages and utility bills?
Minister.
So the member will be aware that some of the responsibilities in relation to those particular issues will fall to other departments as well as my own, and some work was done in the previous mandate around the High Street Task Force, and it reported in 2022, and the recommendation from the High Street Task Force for my department was to reinstate the Back in Business scheme, which has obviously been taken forward, and of course I am completely open to any proposals that either the Minister for Communities or the Minister for Economy would like to bring forward in relation to supporting businesses on our high street, and I'd be happy to work with them in respect of that.
Colin McGrath.
Thank you very Mr. Speaker, given and following on from that point, the fact that the rating policy is crippling our town centre businesses and the consultation closed a number of months ago, could the Minister give us some detail when some of the outcomes from that consultation may start rolling out to help businesses that desperately need that help?
Minister.
Yeah, so as the member has reflected, the consultation closed back in February. We received some 1,400 responses to the consultation. Those have now been analysed and a draft report has been shared with me by officials, and I think will be going to the Finance Committee quite soon to be discussed with officials. And obviously I want to give proper consideration to what people have said in response to the consultation, and I am keen to look at what we can do to ensure that our rating system is aligning with what we're trying to achieve in terms of our economic vision, and that's something that I will be keen to work with my colleague, the Minister for Economy, on.
David Honeyford.
Thank you for the Minister. Just to ask the Minister when the scheme was last formally reviewed and to review its effectiveness and value for money.
Minister.
So in terms of the last time that it was in place up until 2022, there was very positive feedback. I think I don't have the figures in front of me, but the analysis showed that those who were partaking of the scheme were mostly small independent retailers, and it did have a beneficial impact on the high street. I'd be happy to write to the member with some more specifics in relation to the evaluation of it.
Question 3 is withdrawn. I call Owen Tennyson.
Question 4, Mr. Speaker. Apologies.
Minister.
I was pleased to sign an interim fiscal framework on behalf of the Executive last month. This is a significant early milestone towards putting our finances on a more sustainable footing. Following intensive and constructive negotiations, I secured a significant commitment from Treasury that they will review how the Executive is funded. This includes reviewing our relative need if multiple independent and credible sources provide evidence that it is higher than 124%, which I believe that it is. I have established a new team within my department to take forward the important work to agree a final fiscal framework, and one of the first tasks of that team is to consider how we build on the robust independent evidence base that we have already, thanks to the work of the Fiscal Council.
Mr. Tennyson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for that answer. Can I ask the Minister, are you confident that your department has allocated sufficient resources for this work, and will that evidence include the establishment of an independent commission to advise? Minister.
So we have established the team, and we have nominated a number of officials to form those teams. As the member will be aware, there's a certain degree of expertise that is required to take forward that work, and it's important that we have officials with those expertise as part of that team. It's something that I believe is a really important piece of work for us as a department and for us as an executive, that it's taken forward, and we will be ensuring that adequate resources are put into it, including in relation to how we might provide the additional evidence that is may be required in the time ahead.
Anya Murphy.
Collier. Minister, could you detail how much additional funding will actually be available to the Executive following the signing of the interim fiscal framework?
Minister.
Well, following the agreement of the interim fiscal framework on the 22nd of May, that we luckily got over the line just before the general election was called, the needs-based factor of 24% will apply from 2024-25 to new Barnett consequentials arising since the Executive was restored back in February 2024. It will apply when the Executive's relative funding falls below its relative need of 124%, and the funding provided in the financial package which accompanied restoration will be exempt from this calculation, which means the 124% will apply in 2024-25 and 25-26, even if by Treasury calculations the financial package brings the Executive's funding above the 124%. So the application of the 24% needs-based adjustment factor to the spring Barnett consequentials on their own will provide an additional £24 million that will be available to us to allocate in June monitoring, and it's also anticipated that there will be significant additional funding arising from Westminster Mains estimates, but these will not now be confirmed until after the election.
Dr. Steve Aiken.
May I thank the Minister for her answers so far. Minister, we had recent evidence in the Finance Committee given by the Fiscal Council that indicated that the level of funding that we have at the moment may indeed be above the 124 level. Could the Minister give us an assessment of where she thinks our level is at the moment and what the likely differences between the two would be?
Minister.
So the analysis from the Fiscal Council was on the basis of the financial package being included in that calculation, and it put it on their calculations at probably around 125 or 126%. Obviously, what we argued to Treasury was that's the financial package. Our baseline still sits well below that, in around probably 120, 121, and therefore we successfully made the case that we are still below need and that the 124 needs-based adjustments should be applied this year and next year, and thankfully we got that over the line. But as the member will be aware, and as the point that I have made on a number of occasions, that's relative funding to what is going into public services in England, and if public services in England aren't being properly funded, which evidently they are not, then we do not have enough money to run our public services either.
Matthew Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Minister, you've mentioned we were talking about the fiscal framework. There's a joint exchequer committee which has been set up. That has a precedent in Scotland and Wales, but what doesn't have a precedent is something we haven't heard very much about, which is the Public Sector Transformation Board. Will that board completely undermine devolution? By which I mean, at the minute we don't know who's going to be on it. Will it be Whitehall officials? Who will it be? What role will they have in terms of making core decisions around public services and spending here?
So, as the member will be aware, the Public Sector Transformation Board was within the financial package, and it is specific to the allocation of the £235 million that has been earmarked for transformation on the basis of £47 million over each of the next 5 years. The Executive has agreed my approach to the setting up of a transformation board, and that it was important work. I think that all of us recognise needs to be taken forward in terms of transforming and reforming our public services. The basis of the transformation board is to evaluate the bids that come in to ensure that they meet a threshold of being transformational, and I do think it is important work. I don't believe that it anyway undermines devolution, because it will be for the Executive to decide what projects are taken forward, and I think all of us recognise the importance of ensuring that the parameters of devolution are respected in that respect.
Alan Robinson.
Number 5, Minister.
Minister.
I am keen to see this scheme taken forward as quickly as possible to give bereaved families the opportunity to have formal recognition of their loss. Initial discussions have taken place between the Department of Health and the General Register Office as to how the baby loss scheme that may be developed. My officials and those from the Department of Health have also recently met with the managers from the Department of Health and Social Care who deliver the baby loss certificate scheme in England, and a meeting has also been scheduled with the National Records of Scotland officials to investigate how the Scottish scheme operates. This is ongoing engagement which will provide important lessons for the development of a scheme here.
Mr. Robinson.
Minister, for a question. Minister, I've been stunned with the interest in this topic since it was raised in this House. Can you confirm that these certificates will be free, as they are in England? And would you consider extending the criteria beyond the 1st of September 2018 threshold?
Minister.
So, all of those things are currently being considered and worked through as officials scope out the development of a scheme here, and I certainly am open to looking at how we might take forward any of those individual things, and certainly we will be looking at how we could develop the scheme to ensure that it best meets the needs of people here, and potentially we may look at whether there needs to be a consultation to ensure that the views of people are taken on board. We have not yet taken a position as to whether a consultation will be required, but it's something that we will keep under review as we go through negotiations or go through engagements with those officials who are involved in the schemes in Scotland and England.
Militia McKay.
Concorla, August, will baby loss certificates be available as Gaeilge?
Minister.
So I would be keen to build on the progress that has been made so far in registering life events in Irish, and therefore, while officials are working on the preliminary plans as to how the scheme could work, and all options, as I said to Mr Robinson, are being considered in that regard, including on how potentially we could take this forward in relation to the production of baby loss certificates in Irish.
Yeah, Nicole.
Thank you, Minister, for your answers so far. The issue of baby loss certificates is one that constituents have raised with me on a number of occasions, and I wonder, given it's a legislative priority, if the Minister has set aside budget allocations for baby loss certificates. Thank you.
Minister.
So officials are still working through the preliminary plans as to how the scheme will work or could work. So costs can't be finalised until the General Registrar Office has engaged with the Department of Health officials in more detail to agree what our plans for delivery will be. But obviously we'll look at cost implications once those figures have crystallised.
Paula Bradshaw. Minister.
As part of Budget 24-25, TEO submitted a capital bid of £54,000 in relation to leasehold property for the language bodies that are being established under the Identity and Language Act. The Department did not submit any resource bids related to the bodies, although indicated as part of their return that they would bid during the in-year monitoring process when necessary, and the current in-year monitoring process has not yet been completed.
Ms Bradshaw.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you, Finance Minister. That's very helpful information, and it's useful to know that they do have plans within this financial year. I suppose the concern I have as Chair of the Executive Office Committee is that we have no idea what that envelope will look like, and I would appreciate if we can have any updates. Would you receive them in this chamber? Thank you.
Sure.
And I thank the member for that, and I understand TEO have developed a business case and sought approval for expenditure required to establish and sponsor the bodies. It was approved by my department on the 10th of May, and I understand TEO are now in the process of recruiting and appointing core staff along with members of Office and Identity and Cultural Expression and the 2 commissioners, and I'd be happy to share any updates that I have.
Patsy Midlone.
And Fedulum Kestakura and Ira and Fedger Lehi at Inu doing you Kenfa nar her African Iminus Irtis capital Achtarliha Lesa Nanagria Pichanga. Na Kentja Gur in Estia Fad Termache. I just maybe Minister, okay, do you want me to? Right. If I could maybe just ask the Minister to explain the rationale for why the Executive Office Capital DEL bill didn't submit a capital DEL to leasehold property for the languages body, and it's non-recurrent, given it's surely a long-term investment.
Minister.
I think that question might be more appropriately directed at the Executive Office in terms of them being able to explain that.
Jim Allister.
Tell us the costs that were identified in the business case that your department approved, and in terms of competing within the monitoring rounds, we're now in a situation then, are we, where health, which says it's 200-300 million short, is going to have to compete in the monitoring rounds with pet projects like the Irish Language Commissioner?
Minister.
So I don't have the figures from the business case in front of me. I will be happy to write to the member on that specific point, and obviously it's for any department to bid for any project that it sees fit as part of the monitoring round process.
All the cool.
Kester Shock, question number 7.
Minister.
So in the previous mandate, my predecessor Conor Murphy brought forward a number of procurement policy notes that were agreed by the Executive, including one on social value, and that existing policy on social value is already delivering. For example, 3,500 long-term unemployed people have gained employment. 90+ social enterprises are now part of government supply chains. 3,600 hours of volunteering with the voluntary community and social enterprise sector have been delivered. 8,000 hours of skills development activities completed. 2,800 weeks of work experience delivered, and 3,800+ hours of environmental awareness initiatives completed. A review of the scoring social value policy is in progress, and I plan to bring a refreshed policy to the Executive before summer recess. The revised policy will make it easier for small and micro businesses to deliver social value. There will be a new requirement for departments to have targeted social value strategies and to consider grant funding for social and community services, and social value themes will better align to a new programme for government, climate change commitments and/or the investment strategy. And for major capital projects which impact on communities, there will be a requirement for effective community consultation on social value.
Thank you, Minister, for your response. So in addition to the key challenges or the key changes really that you've outlined, what other additional aspects of ensuring there's more inclusivity around social value would the Minister like to see in this policy coming forward?
Minister.
So the policy has been enhanced to expand the remit for social value in other aspects of end-to-end procurement processes, not confined just to a scoring aspect, to encourage departments to embed social value into their organisational objectives by developing a targeted social value strategy, to include additional requirements to strengthen the consideration for grant funding for social and community services, to encourage departments to consider alternative delivery models and to promote a circular economy, and to consider how to design the procurement process to make it accessible for social and micro enterprises and include green public procurement criteria, and increase the thresholds from 139,000 to 500,000 for scoring social value in services contracts to reduce the impact on SMEs, social enterprises and micro businesses.
Speaker, and thank you, Minister, for your questions so far, your answers so far rather. Does the Minister agree that the Tories' economic activity of the Public Bodies Bill would be disastrous really for the development of social value policies and ethical procurement within the public sector?
Sir.
So I'm not familiar with the detail of the bill, but I'd be happy to write to the member in respect of it.
Philip Brett. Minister.
I appreciate the important role of hospices in delivering specialist care to people with palliative and end-of-life care needs. Funding support for the Children's Hospice is a matter for the Health Minister, and I am committed to working with the Health Minister to consider any proposals from the Department of Health to support the Children's Hospice.
Mr. Brett.
Mr. Speaker, firstly, can I apologise to the House for not being in my place at topical questions yesterday. Minister, thank you for that response, and in your written answer to me you stated that the previous Health Minister did not submit a bid to you for additional funding for the hospice. Now, with new leadership in the Department for Health, will you commit to continuing to work with the new Minister to ensure we deliver the funding for this vital service?
Minister.
As I have previously stated on the record, I'm happy to work with the Health Minister in respect of any proposals that he's brought forward. Obviously, departments have now received their opening budgets for 24-25 and should be considering their priorities within that. If these services aren't considered affordable within the department's baseline, obviously I would encourage the Minister to submit a bid as part of the June monitoring process, and it will then be a matter for the Executive to consider how any bids and to allocate the available funding.
Liz Cummins.
Please.
Minister.
With the Speaker's permission, I will answer questions 9 and 10 together. Alongside my executive colleagues, I am committed to addressing issues of affordability, sustainability and supporting our children to have the best start in life. I raised the importance of making improvements to the tax-free childcare scheme in my engagement with the Chief Secretary to the Treasury during the Finance Interministerial Standing Committee in March. At that meeting, I asked the Chief Secretary to consider helping families here who are struggling with the costs of childcare by raising the tax relief from 20% to 30%. Department of Education officials have engaged with officials from HMRC and Treasury on this matter also. HMRC has advised that a change to the tax-free childcare scheme is not currently under consideration by the British Government, and it is not currently possible to make local changes here in isolation on their IT system, even if the additional costs were to be covered by the Executive. This is why the Executive has agreed that an alternative local scheme should be established to address affordability concerns. My department is represented on the Task and Finish Group, which has been established to support the Executive's childcare priorities with 3 officials. As we take forward the Executive's childcare priorities, we need to make sure that we are using the available funds in the best way possible, supporting parents and caregivers effectively, efficiently and fairly. NISRA will play a key role in providing data to inform decisions on measures beyond 24-25. They have offered to develop a new survey of childcare arrangements to provide a robust evidence base for policy and to demonstrate its effectiveness in the longer term. Also within my department, the Innovation and Consultancy Services Division stands ready to assist the Department of Education in the design and rollout of pilot schemes and the longer term development of childcare support. This offer of assistance has been notified to the Education Minister.
Thank you, Minister, for a very comprehensive answer, and I know this is an issue that you're personally very invested in. As part of the childcare strategy, the wider childcare strategy, is the Minister considering introduction of any support through the rate system to support early years in childcare settings?
Minister.
So, as the member will be aware, and I have received correspondence on this issue, there have been calls to provide rates relief to improve affordability. Around 75% of identifiable childcare providers in the rating system currently qualify for small business rates relief, and the rates bills for these providers are £7,000 per year or less. My department has also considered whether further rates relief would meaningfully improve the affordability of childcare. So assuming that 100% of rates relief was passed on, a saving of that amount divided by a small number or by the number of children using the service might only result in a marginal reduction in the weekly fee for each child. So as such, it's not part of the £25 million package of measures that was agreed by the Executive for development and implementation, and it's anticipated those measures will be more effective in supporting the sector and families, but it is obviously something that I'm happy to keep under review, and if the Education Minister wants to engage further around specific proposals, I'm happy to do so.
Monsieur.
Minister, how is your department supporting childcare providers specifically?
Minister.
So as I have just outlined in relation to the rates relief support, there are currently 141 registered childcare providers who are entitled to small business rates relief, receiving about £150,000 of support. The small business rates relief scheme has been extended by my department for 24-25, and I'm committed to ensuring that we continue to develop our rating system to ensure it's fair, equitable and progressive and aligns with the Executive's economic vision. And while we have initially allocated £25 million to the childcare strategy in the budget, it's possible that potentially we might be able to provide some more funding for 24-25 for childcare if that becomes available and if the Education Minister brings forward more concrete proposals through bids in the in-year monitoring process.
Diane Forsyth.
Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister, for your answers so far. To build on the previous question with regard to the rates relief, I would ask that the Minister, would she consider having a look in the short term again at the rates relief for childcare settings, given that the £25 million settlement has a strand for business support where the Department of Economy, Invest and I are going to reach in and support businesses that are struggling. For those that are getting relief that is under £7,500, I'm sure she'll appreciate that actually most childcare settings are hitting higher than that under the current business rates relief system. So I'd ask that she would consider look at that.
And I thank the member for that question. And yes, in my response to the Education Minister in relation to the proposals that he brought forward, I said that my officials were happy to continue to engage with his officials in relation to any of the proposals, including in relation to rates relief.
Maurice Bradley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I asked the Minister of Finance to outline what steps her department will take to achieve a regional balance when placing Northern Ireland civil service staff in posts.
Minister.
Civil service staff are posted in accommodation across the region, both in the Department of Finance's office estate and in buildings owned or leased by other departments. 6 Connect 2 hubs were opened in August 2022, allowing staff to work remotely at 6 regional locations. As an alternative to working from their home or in a designated workplace. The Civil Service has also implemented a hybrid working policy which helps support regional balance by affording its workforce more choice about their working location, allowing a mix of workplace, home and remote working. As a major employer, the Civil Service recognises the potential benefits of hybrid working in contributing to regional balance. Therefore, hybrid working is available where possible for all employment opportunities offered by the Civil Service. Decisions about where Civil Service staff need to be located to perform their work duties are for departments to consider. Individual departments determine the number, type and grades of posts at each location.
We now move to topical questions. Call Matthew O'Toole.
Speaker. Minister, the Sinn Féin manifesto ahead of the Assembly election in 2022 called for, quote, greater devolution of fiscal powers to better equip the Assembly to target resources and develop progressive tax policies that will improve public services. I agree with that aspiration, Minister, but what specific powers are you seeking and did you raise those powers at the first meeting of the Joint Exchequer Committee?
Minister.
So, as the member will be aware, the Independent Fiscal Commission published its report in 2022. There was a subsequent consultation on that report, and I will be considering the responses to the consultation and bringing proposals in relation. I'll be considering the broader, all of the tax powers that were reported on and the findings in relation to those, and bringing recommendations to the Executive in due course. As the member is also aware, the interim fiscal framework set out the parameters for discussion in relation to a final fiscal framework, which includes the principles of fiscal devolution, and that was something that was discussed at the first meeting of the Joint Exchequer Committee.
If I understand the Minister correctly, the fiscal framework context for discussing devolution was discussed, but not perhaps the precise powers you would like to see devolved here. Minister, the Fiscal Commission did report in 2022. I just quoted a manifesto from 2022. We are now back here several months and we're several years on from first having these debates around greater fiscal devolution. Which specific powers would you seek to devolve? You need executive agreement. Which specific powers would you like to devolve, and when will this House be updated?
Minister.
So I thank the member for his question, and he's quite right. This is work that has been going on for some time. It's work that I'm committed to taking forward. He will also be aware that in taking forward any negotiations in relation to the devolution of fiscal powers, we will have to have an executive position on that, and so I will be bringing recommendations to the executive, and I would like to be doing that as quickly as possible, because obviously we are trying to progress negotiations in relation to a final fiscal framework.
Ciara Ferguson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Minister agree that all departments, including the Department of Health, as referenced by our Health Minister yesterday, are under enormous financial pressure due to the underfunding of our public services by the British Government?
Minister.
So we are all aware that over a decade of austerity and cuts has been hugely damaging for our public services and for workers, families and communities here. It's clear that all departments are under significant financial pressure. This was evidenced by the fact that in terms of our departmental resource bids, there was 3 times as many asks as there was funding available. And of course, while it's welcome, the financial package brings the executive above the level of relative need in 24-25. It doesn't mean that we are adequately funded. It only provides funding relative to spend in England. The ongoing underfunding of public services in England means that the executive, along with Scotland and Wales, is not funded to deliver good quality public services. I am on record, and I will reiterate, that I wish I had been in a position to provide every department with more funding to deliver public services, but the stark reality is the demands on our finances far outstrip the funding that we have. That said, I will continue to work with all my executive colleagues, and I met the new Health Minister yesterday and committed to working constructively and positively with him, and I will continue to press the British Government, whoever that might be after the 5th of July, for more funding for public services.
Peter Ferguson.
Thank you, Minister, for the update thus far. Would the Minister also agree that it's a unified approach by the Executive to the Treasury, whether this British Government or any new government, is essential to ensuring that our public services are properly funded?
Sure.
So I think that working together and having a unified voice will better place us to meet the challenges that we have head on. I want to work with all of my ministerial colleagues in making the case for more investment in public services. One of our first actions in February was to write to the Prime Minister on long-term funding for public services, a position that was endorsed by this House. And with that united position, I have been able to achieve some concessions from Treasury in respect of the interim fiscal framework. I think none of us, either us in here or the public out there, are under any illusions about the state of our finances, but what people want to see is leadership and collective working. They want to feel that there's some hope that things will improve, and working with my colleagues in the Executive, I intend to show that leadership.
Ms Bradshaw.
Mr Speaker, Minister, can you please outline what will be the impact of the 7% cut in capital budgets compared to last year? Thank you.
Minister.
So, as the member has stated, the capital budget that we have to allocate this year was almost as pressed as our resource budget for what we had to available. We had 1.5 times as many bids, and it's very, very challenging for departments in terms of what they will be able to deliver. All of those departments now have their allocations, and they are currently planning how they will live within their budgets and prioritising projects that they will be taking forward.
Ms Bradshaw.
So, can you give us your assessment on whether the earmarked capital projects will be completed within the allocated budget, and whether they still represent value for money? Thank you.
Minister.
So the projects that have been earmarked in terms of capital bids are previous executive flagship priorities, and they are based on the bids that have been made by departments that they believe will be required in this financial year, and it will be for departments to keep that under review and ensure that if they aren't going to spend any money similar to their resource budgets for this financial year, that they report that to the Department of Finance so that any money can be reallocated at the earliest opportunity.
David 24.
Mr Speaker, around a third of payments from government to small businesses are currently late. Many of these are self-employed or small micro companies who do work and provide services for all sections of government and arm's length bodies. When the money's there to pay them, does the Minister recognise the difficulties that this is causing, and will the Minister commit to look into this issue further?
Sure.
So there is a prompt payment policy, and all departments and government bodies and public bodies should be adhering to that, and certainly I would encourage that all payments are made promptly, particularly to small and micro businesses, because very small amounts of money to some public sector organisations could be the putting the lights out of a small business. So it is really important that payments are made promptly. I would be happy to engage with the member on this issue, and if there's further work that needs to be done in respect of it.
Drawing forward.
Yeah, thank you to the Minister, and thank you for your response. It is a real problem, and we can all want and hope, but it is really starting to legislate to allow and make sure that this happens, because as the Minister has said, this is causing devastating outcomes to small business. And I will take her up on that, officer, in meeting. Maybe we can also meet with the Federation of Small Business at the same time and expand that and look to provide solutions. So thank you for your response.
I would be happy to engage with the member and with the Federation of Small Businesses. I've had the opportunity to engage with FSB on a number of occasions since I've taken up office, and would be happy to do so again.
Ann Dodds.
Mr Speaker, could I ask the Minister for her assessment of the Department of Health's claim that it needs an annual rise in its budget of 6 to 7% every year just to deliver the same service?
Minister.
So I think we all recognise that there are inflationary impacts that hit all departments and the delivery of public services over the course of a year, and certainly over the last few years there have been particular inflationary impacts that have seen costs go up. The Department of Health has that particular figure that it states is required. Over the past 3 years of this current spending review period, the Department of Health's baseline has increased by 1.6 billion, so it has had a significant uplift in this spending review period.
Ms Dodds.
Thank you, Minister. The Department of Health has indicated that it has a long-term desire for reform and reorganisation. Could you outline for the House what bids you've received in relation to that reform and reorganisation?
Minister.
So the process for, as the member will be aware, the Transformation Board will be allocating the specific money that has been ring-fenced for public sector transformation, the £47 million this year and each of the next 5 years. And the process to ask for bids only started last week, so departments will only be submitting those at this point in time. They will be considered over the next short period, and hopefully will be in a position to make some allocations in relation to that in the near future.
Boyle.
Could I thank the Minister for answers so far? Just on that matter, could the Minister provide a full update on the Transformation Fund?
Minister.
I think we would all agree that it has been clear that the level of funding we have for public services isn't sufficient, but also that we need to transform how we provide public services, and across many sectors public services are in critical need of investment and reform to ensure that we are able to deliver quality and efficiency of service for citizens. Transformation is also essential if the Executive is to put its finances on a sustainable footing. As I have already said, we have £235 million for ring-fenced public sector transformation. This year we have £47 million to allocate. The Executive agreed on the 9th of May to my proposed approach for making quick progress on the use of this important funding. I have now established and appointed members to an interim public sector transformation board. The interim board will be chaired by the head of the Civil Service, Jane Brady, and include Professor Francis Rowan, an independent non-executive member of the NICS board, who was previously the director of the Economic and Social Research Institute in Dublin. Julie Harrison, the NIO Permanent Secretary, will also join the interim board, having been nominated by the Secretary of State. The interim board is working at pace, has issued a call to departments to submit transformation proposals, and once assessed, the interim board will make recommendations on those projects which could be supported by this funding, and I look forward to considering these and making progress on the transformation so urgently needed for our public services.
Mr Boyle.
And could I thank the Minister? Just, is there a timeline in relation to when the first transformation funding will be awarded?
Minister.
So I had initially hoped, and I think I've been on record a number of times saying this, that I would like to have been in the position to allocate some of this funding in June monitoring. It was an ambitious timeline and dependent on agreeing a way forward with the British Government. Progress has not been rapid enough to achieve this timeline, with discussion between my officials and their British Government counterparts taking longer than expected. I have written to the Secretary of State to highlight the need for increased pace and momentum to avoid any further delay. Nevertheless, it remains my aim that funding will be announced in the summer for a number of the smaller scale projects. For larger scale projects, the process for application and assessment was always going to be a longer process given the higher levels of transformation investment sought, and I have asked the interim board to progress its work at pace.
Neil McAllister.
The Minister for your answers so far. Now that we are into June, I wonder if the Minister could estimate the quantum of funding that will be available through the June monitoring round.
Minister.
So what we know for definite is there will be a minimum of £65 million for allocation. That's comprised of the £24 million from the application of the 24% needs-based adjustment factor to the spring budget consequentials, and £41 million of agreed carryover of Barnett consequentials that was received very late in 23-24. It's also anticipated that there will be significant additional funding arising from Westminster Mains estimates, but as these were not introduced before Parliament was prorogued, both the timing and the amount are now uncertain. However, I am still hopeful that there will be in the region of £200 million available for allocation in June monitoring.
Ms McAllister.
Thank you, Minister. At Finance Committee, it was suggested that there may not be an October monitoring round, so I wonder if the Minister could set forward the rationale for this.
So the monitoring round process is not set in stone and is kept under review, and sometimes there is not a great deal of money to allocate in October monitoring rounds, and the bulk of money comes in January and June. However, we are intending to do a October monitoring round process this year, and one of the reasons for that is, as members will be aware, there wasn't the ability to do a consultation on a draft budget before we agreed a final budget, and so departments will be going out to consult and do their EQIAs on their individual budgets, and we would like to be in a position to consider any equality impacts that may arise in that process and potentially mitigate if there is a need at October monitoring.
Well, that brings a conclusion to the topical questions. If members would take their ease, and we'll resume the previous debate.